Well, hi there. Hello, and welcome to the Pitch Grid, the podcast that brings you news, analysis, and insight from both sides of the football world, the NFL, and the world of soccer. Tonight, we have another special guest with us. His name is Abe Gordon. He is the host of the Abe-T-L Show on 92.9 The Game in Atlanta, Georgia. He also does pre and post game for 92.9 The Game's coverage of Atlanta United. Abe, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Good to hear from you.
All right, so we're recording this minutes after the Maxx Crosby trade just fell through. Abe, this has a ton of implications through free agency, not just for the Ravens and the Raiders, but probably across the league. What are your thoughts about this right off the top of the hat?
Well, it's interesting because Maxx Crosby insisted he was healthy last year and that the Raiders were holding him out when he was dealing with that knee injury, and it appears that the Raiders were doing due diligence at the time and trying to protect him as best they could.
Hmm.
Yes, they were tanking, and so that's part of the discussion, and understandably so. But the fact that the Ravens would not pass him in the physical today, I have to imagine it is knee related. And because of that, yeah, it's an interesting situation because the number of pass rushers that maybe the Ravens would have targeted are off the board.
Hmm.
The good news for Baltimore is if they're willing to spend money, Trey Hendrickson is still available, and so
Very
I
true.
do wonder if that's their pivot. And Hendrickson's expected to make an announcement tomorrow, so that's going to be very interesting.
Oh, that is very interesting. Do you think any team goes forward with Crosby at all at this point, or is it kind of everyone kind of just holds off now?
Well, look, the Ravens rejected this deal for 2 first-round picks, and so the question now is, with the Raiders understanding that he failed a physical, what do they have to accept? What will the offer become? Because if you can get Maxx Crosby for a second-round pick and a third-round pick, maybe it's worth the risk of clearing him through that process, the physical, and risking it. The
Mhm.
Ravens deemed it not worth the risk to give up 2 first-round picks for him. Does someone deem it worth the risk to give up a different combination of picks? I think that's where the bargaining now turns to, because I just don't see a way that the Raiders can play the season with him on the roster after shipping him out once.
Yeah, and obviously the Raiders have to make a quick pivot because now they probably can't sign Tyler Linderbaum to the massive contract they were going to give him that they announced yesterday. That was announced yesterday. Do you think they keep Linderbaum? Does he become a free agent again? And if so, where does he go?
Yeah, I mean, look, the salary cap is not, it's not a real thing. If the Raiders want to or need to move money around to give Linderbaum the deal that they agreed to, that'll still happen. Like
Mm.
there's restructures, there's releases, there's all sorts of making, signing bonuses or roster guarantee. There are all sorts of ways to create cap space. I believe they had a ton of space to begin with. This obviously does cut back into it. But yeah, like the cap's real, but it's also not real. So they'll get creative if they need cap space there.
Fair enough. This is just a rare situation that we don't usually see in the NFL these days, particularly. So it's going to be very fascinating to see how the ripple effects are from this trade, because of course trades become official starting tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. All right, so let's switch to your Falcons. After that bombshell, the of course your Falcons had a pretty disappointing season last year. Went 8-9, finished third in the South. They cleared out the front office. They fired Raheem Morris, um, and they got Matt Ryan in to help with their coach search, with their manager search, GM search. What have been your impressions of Matt Ryan and his job so far that he's done in the front office with Atlanta?
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone's saying all the right things, but we've seen regime changes and hires and all that where everything sounds great, and then you get on the field and the team's no better than they were. So,
Right.
so yeah, it's great to have Matt Ryan back. Like, he's obviously a franchise legend. But at the same time, ultimately, how we view Matt Ryan's tenure, how we view Kevin Stefanski, Ian Cunningham, the GM, is going to be about wins. And so they seem aligned. Everything seems fine and dandy right now. But this is a franchise that hasn't been to the playoffs in 8 seasons, and that needs to end sooner rather than later for us to start to feel like they're doing a good job.
That's fair enough. What do you think was? Why do you think Atlanta brought in Ian Cunningham to be the GM specifically? Is it like he and Matt Ryan have connections, or is it just like they felt like he was the right man for the job and he pairs well with Stefanski?
Yeah, I think he does seemingly pair well with Stefanski, and I think it's about value and vision and aligning between those 3 guys: Matt Ryan, Kevin Stefanski, and Ian Cunningham. And look, Ian Cunningham was a hot name, and not just for Atlanta, but other jobs as well. And if he didn't get a job in Atlanta this year,
Hmm.
he might have gotten a job elsewhere this year, or certainly it felt like next year would have been, the next step up for him. But he was ready to take that step up. And considering what has taken place in Chicago over the past 2 years with their turnaround,
Hmm.
understandably so. So, yeah, it just fits. They all just seem aligned, and everyone's swimming in the same direction, so to say. And that's what you look for, at least initially, and then we'll see how it shapes up in terms of some of the decisions in free agency and draft. And if Stefanski wants this and Ian Cunningham wants that, who gets the final say, and what role does Matt Ryan play in all that? Right now, they seem all to be in line. So it does look like they're working together well.
Well, that's great because I know some Falcons fans have talked to me about how they feel like there might be too many cooks in the kitchen with, Matt Ryan, Ian Cunningham, and Stefanski all in on the same project. And so it's good to hear that you think that they're all in the same direction and all that. Is there a feeling that there's a general plan in place? I know y'all signed Tua yesterday to a massive contract, and of course, you have Michael Penix in the fold as well. Um, so I know a lot of this is going to be quarterback dependent, but is there a feeling that there's a plan in place besides the quarterback spot?
Well, if I'm going to be honest, I think the plan is to take a look at a lot of things this year and reassess. And this could be a year in which Penix solidifies himself as a franchise quarterback. You end up picking up his 5th-year option, or extending him, and you make that decision. This could be a year in which you get a better look at Kyle Pitts and say, okay, this guy is a franchise tight end. He was on the franchise tag this year, and we give him an extension next year. You're going to have to extend or sign Drake London, Bijan Robinson, if you don't get that done this offseason. And so I think it's just a lot of figuring things out. And I hate to say it because, like I said, we all want this 8-year playoff drought to end. But I think ultimately, if it doesn't, you still get things accomplished this season by figuring out what is and what isn't. And
Hmm.
I wouldn't call it a rebuild. There's too much offensive talent for this to be a rebuild. But I do think you can find out what you can move forward with and what you can't move forward with, and go from there. And unfortunately, I think that probably takes priority this season, more necessarily than going all in to make the playoffs. You're not winning a championship right now. So, I just think you got to figure out what the direction is for the future. And I think you probably use this year to do it.
Fair enough. So you mentioned Kyle Pitts. Of course, y'all franchise tagged him this year. He had a pretty decent season considering his career overall. Over 900 yards is pretty good. Do you think that with Kevin Stefanski now as the head coach, that he'll be coming into the David Njoku, Harold Fannin role, perhaps, and maybe he becomes one of the focal points of this offense now?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the hope, is that Kevin Stefanski's had success using tight ends, 2 tight end sets, and that Kyle Pitts will be able to be featured in that. But it's just a matter of consistency for him. Even this past year, which he was a Pro Bowler and near the league lead in tight end categories across the board, It was still a couple of games that were dynamic, outstanding, four in particular, that really stood out down the stretch. And then the rest of the games is sometimes hit or miss. And so he's got to find that consistency that we saw from him his rookie season under Matt Ryan at quarterback. If he can do that, I think he will return to being viewed as that sort of tight end. But it's interesting because after his rookie year, he was looked at as kind of the next Kittle, the next Kelsey. In the past couple of years, he's gotten passed up by a number of tight ends. You look at Sam Laporta, you look at Trey McBride, you look at Tyler Warren, you look at Brock Bowers, and all of a sudden, Kyle Pitts, who was like, yeah, this guy's a no doubt top 5 tight end, is I don't even know if this guy's top 10 right now.
Mm.
And so he's definitely out to prove some things, and he's got this 1-year franchise tag to do it.
Yeah, for sure. It is a major probably step in his career, to be honest. Um, so if you had, I know it's incredibly early, and of course, free agency draft is going to determine a lot of this, and of course, training camp as well. But do you think that Tua has a pretty good shot to get the starting job at this point, or is it Stefanski going to probably go with the younger gun and Penix?
Yeah, it really comes down to what Penix is able to do physically and when. I think if Penix is able to turn this into a quarterback competition, if he physically can do everything that Tua can do, I think it's going to be incredibly difficult for Tua to win a quarterback competition. And what I mean by that is he would have to very clearly, visibly outperform Penix in training camp and in the preseason. And if he doesn't do that, if it's neck and neck, they probably give the ball to Penix. The problem is, I don't know if Penix is going to be able to do that from a physical standpoint. And you can't hold what I don't know if the team will call it this, but what we will call a quarterback competition if one quarterback is limited in what he can do physically. And so if Penix is not ready to go in the preseason, not ready to go throughout training camp, even if he's doing a number of things, if he can't do everything, you cannot compare the two. And I think that would lead to Tua being given a couple of games at the start of the season. The question then becomes, does Tua perform in week 1, week 2, or however long it might be until Penix is 100% a full go? Does Tua perform well enough to where you can no longer bench him? Do you start the year 3-1 through 4 weeks? If so, I'm not benching Tua at that point for Michael Penix. And I think that's the gamble that Tua is playing. I think that's what he is banking on, that he will be given week 1, week 2, and if he plays well enough, can hold off Penix the rest of the season.
Is there any indication right now, just that how far Penix is into his recovery, and maybe how soon he can return to maybe a full, if he'll be ready by training camp to give this a full go, or is it going to be hit and miss?
The team has not provided any specifics, but Michael Penix has gone on a number of outlets in the past couple of weeks and insisted that his plan, his goal, and he is ahead of schedule or at least on track to be ready week 1. Now, again, what does ready mean? Does it mean you're 100% doing everything
Right.
you need to be to be a starting quarterback in the NFL? I don't know. But the way Michael Penix has talked in the last 20 days, he is very confident, in my opinion, overly so, that he will be
Mhm.
starting week 1. So we will see. I don't necessarily buy it, but he's definitely talking like that's the plan.
Yeah, considering the amount of contract that Tua got, that definitely throws that into some skepticism for sure. So we've been a couple days now into legal tampering. We've had some massive names leave, not just the Falcons, but a lot of teams, and switching causes and all that. What are some of your reactions to the free agency moves that have been dealt with Falcons players coming in and out?
Yeah, in terms of Falcons players, they've added some depth in the receiver room. The question is, have they added their number 2 guy? And they picked up Olamide Zaccheaus, who had spent a number of years here, and just don't feel like he's a number 2. He's a number 3, or maybe not even that, maybe just wide receiver depth. The bigger question is Jahan Dotson, former Washington Commander, spent some time with the Philadelphia Eagles. Can he be the running mate alongside Drake London, with the idea that you don't really have to be a number 2 receiver, because it certainly is possible that Kyle Pitts is the true number 2 option along with Bijan Robinson out of the backfield. And so a number 2 receiver really might be asked to open the field up a little bit differently, but stat-wise play more like a number 3. And so they've added some depth there. But the big question is linebacker. Caden Ellis, who's been
Mm.
outstanding for Jeff Ulbrich, went back to his original team, the New Orleans Saints, today. $11 million per year. It was going to be too much for the Atlanta Falcons to spend. They added Christian Harris, former Alabama linebacker, was drafted by the Texans. They restructured the deal for Troy Anderson, and so it looks like maybe those 2 guys are going to be the first opportunities to replace Caden Ellis. But that is a significant piece of production defensively for Jeff Ulbrich, defensive coordinator, that he will not have.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Ellis next, actually, because I know he's been an incredible leader for that defense. And it's just an incredible story in general. Caden Ellis is. Um, what is your sense from like fans in general about this free agency and what the Falcons are doing in general?
Well, I don't think too many people had high expectations for the Falcons to do much of anything, and that's pretty much what they have done is
Mhm.
not much of anything. And so we're all kind of still waiting to see if there's any sort of significant move that catches us by surprise. But they have been relatively bargain hunting, right? I mean, Tua
Mhm.
obviously is playing for the veterans minimum here, so it's a bar. I like Tua. I think it's a good risk reward ratio here, but it's very low risk and very low cost. And you could go up and down the few moves they have made, and say that with relative certainty. And so,
Yeah,
still waiting to see if there's an impact player, or these are just guys that they kind of hope will be impacts. It'd be nice to pull in a guy that we're like, yeah, that guy's definitely going to make this team better. I'm not entirely sure that they've done that yet.
fair enough. Rapid fire, real quick. What are some free agency signings that you've been impressed with, and do you have any like bold predictions on free agents that haven't signed yet?
Well, I do think the Titans have spent a lot of money, and it's going to be really interesting to see how that works out for them. Obviously, um, it's they have their quarterback. I do like Cam Ward. They didn't
Mhm.
have much around him.
Right.
So I think they've added to the defense. They've added to the offensive line, which is important. And so that's a start for them. I think the Raiders, we talked about it with this Maxx Crosby thing. Does that throw a wrench in any of their plans? But, they had a couple of linebackers in Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker. They had Linderbaum. They're obviously expected to add Mendoza out of the draft to play quarterback. And so they're setting things up for a big offseason as well. And then in terms of free agents still to sign, the big 2, I kind of guess, just in the way it's shaping up, is obviously Trey Hendrickson, who's supposed to make his announcement tomorrow. And then still interested to see where Kyler Murray goes. Like Tua, he's going to be able to play somewhere, at least for the first year, for the veterans minimum. And so there's some value there if you think he's good. And there's still some debate about that as well. But I again, like Tua, I think it's certainly worth the risk.
Yeah, for sure. So let's head to the draft real quick. I know you guys pick late. You do not have a
Yeah.
first round pick, in this year's draft, but um, I know again free agency will clear a lot of this picture up. But do you have any guesses as to where Falcons might head in terms of draft?
Yeah, I mean they're picking 48th, so they're pretty deep into the second round there. And if you'd asked me a couple of days ago before the legal tampering period, I would have said, boy, they might go receiver with their number 1 pick, which is in the second round. But you add Jahan Dotson, you add Olamide Zaccheaus, and maybe that need's not as big as it was. I do wonder, and it's always going to depend on who falls where. I do wonder if they're looking at taking a new center at that point in the draft. If Jake Slaughter out of Florida falls that far, you certainly would look there. And then this James Pierce Jr. thing is certainly hanging over their heads as well. So
Mhm.
I would not be surprised if at that time they add defensive line, specifically potentially interior after David Onyemata left for the I believe it was the New York Jets.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be so fascinating now that the picture is clearing up and to see where teams are plotting their moves next. So let's head pitch side and talk some footy. Abe, Atlanta United. Oof. It's been a rough start. Three losses in games for Tata Martino in his return after the absence from Atlanta. And from the outside looking in, man, it's rough. What do you think's going on with United, and is there any way this can easily be fixed or turned around?
Well, I don't think easily is the right word. Could it be fixed over time? I think is the question,
Mhm.
and I think there's two explanations to what's happening. And the first explanation is this is a process where they're asked to play a brand new style with a couple of new pieces that have been placed into the lineup, and there's an adjustment period. They had one of their preseason games was rained out, so they're short. Some of their build up to the season that certainly hurt a little bit of their preparation and familiarity with what their new tasks are and how they're being asked to play. And I think you've seen a little bit of that in instances where they conceded goals, where if they were a little bit more familiar with their responsibilities at each turn here, maybe they could have prevented that. So that's certainly one possibility. Is that and Tata Martino said after this most recent loss to Real Salt Lake this past weekend that, hey, it is a long-term process. It was never going to be ready match day 3, and that's where we are.
For
The,
sure.
the other the other issue is that you need your designated players to be the best players on the pitch, and two of the three simply are not that, at least not right now. Latte Lath and Miguel Almiron have not been good enough, and ultimately you can have this long-term learning curve and the process as Tata wants, but if those two guys aren't good enough, you're just not going to survive in MLS. You need your designated players to be the best players on your team, and right now,
Mhm.
two of the three are not.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I mean, it felt like with FC Cincinnati game, y'all played 80 minutes pretty fairly well against a good FC Cincinnati side and showed it. Even though that first half was awful against Real Salt Lake, it felt like that second half there was again some promise. So, do you think that this? I mean, this team has what it takes with the likes, even with the new additions and stuff like that. And with Alexei Moranchuk coming back as well, does that help?
Yeah, Moranchuk's outstanding, and they badly, sorely needed him, and I think it showed in the first two goals of the season with him starting in the lineup there. I just find I do find it tough to believe that they're going to be good enough because of Miggy and Latte Loth. Now, I think Latte Loth is still good enough. I think he can figure it out. Hopefully, Miguel Almiron's a different story. He's older, he's a
Hmm.
little bit slower, and the burst is not there. He's being asked to do more than he did at Newcastle, or more than he did the first time he was here in Atlanta United when he was playing alongside Joseph Martinez. He's being asked to be the guy, and he's just not good enough as the guy right now. And so I'm hopeful Latte Loth can figure it out. I don't think there's a path to Miguel Almiron being good enough right
Hmm.
now. And so I don't know what the plan is with that.
So, okay, let's get to Miggy first. Of course, he was with y'all in the magical start to your MLS campaigns, winning y'all an MLS Cup. And then, of course, he went to Newcastle and really didn't have a ton of success there, to be honest. And then, of course, he's come back here. Is it just age has finally caught up to him? What is exactly is Tata asking Miguel Almiron to do? Because like listening to the games on the 92.9, it feels like a lot of the times he's being asked to do too much, almost like all the free kicks, all the corners, all the set pieces, basically, and uh, being asked to be almost the fulcrum for this entire attack. Am I wrong on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not concerned about him taking, free kicks. I'm concerned with his inability to make a difference in the run of play. Right?
Hmm.
I mean, he has lost a step physically. He's just not beating guys to the corner. Essentially, he's not
Right.
faster than defenders anymore, and that was such a massive part of his game. And part of this is him, part of this is Latte Loth, but Latte Loth is just disconnected entirely from everyone else in the attack, in the build,
Mhm.
and so They have to figure that out. Part of that's on Miggy. Part of it's definitely on Latte Loth as well. But yeah, right now Miggy's just not taking anyone on. He's not beating his
Hmm.
man. And you just need to be better.
Yeah, for sure, especially in the position that he plays in. So confession, I'm a Middlesbrough supporter, so I got to see Latte Loth play before he went to Atlanta United. Uh, he was an incredible presser, and I feel like when y'all got him for the amount of money that you got him, I was convinced that he was going to win Golden Boot because having seen him play, like I was convinced because he pressed so well and so hard, was electric and fast that he could score a ton of goals, and it just feels like he's either not interested or he's not connecting with the tactics. And I know that might be unfair to him in general, just because he's had two coaches now in MLS and all that. What are your thoughts on Latte, and what maybe could Tata do to bring the best out of Latte?
Well, it's interesting. It feels like the way that Tata wants to play is a way that would support Latte Loss' greatest skills. Vertical is a term that Tata has used when talking about how they want this attack to look. And so that's obviously what you would think Latte Loth is ideal for. Play the ball up the field, get him into space, let him outrun guys. But he's just been completely disconnected from the entire buildup, from the entire attack, from the moment he got here.
Mm,
And it's been a little bit confusing. He started off great. I think he had like 5 goals in his first 6 games, something like that. And he's just been completely unable to find the back of the net for the most part since then. And it's unfortunate because, again, you brought him in to score goals and everyone was excited about him. We saw all these highlight reels of him essentially making defenders look dumb, making goalies look
mhm,
dumb. He doesn't look faster than most of these defenders, which is a problem. And he just doesn't look connected. He doesn't know which runs to make. He doesn't know what pass is coming. And they've got to figure that out. I do still think he's good enough, but they've got to get him on the same page as the midfield and the rest of the attack. And so far, that hasn't happened. Now, I've always had a grace period for players coming into a new league. I
mhm,
think, you know, they have to learn their teammates. They have to learn how opponents defend them. They have to learn what buildups look like, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the opponent only needs to learn, some of the tendencies of one new player. And so the grace period is there, but we're getting to the point now in his second season where that's no longer an excuse. And so, yeah, he's got to get it going. It's been very disappointing.
What would be the point to where Atlanta has to cut their losses with Latte?
It's just a money situation. Is it worth the value of buying out the contract, or and that's where the problem is that you've got two designated players in him and Miggy that you might be interested in
Mm,
buying out. Yeah, and I don't think MLS rules allow you to buy out both of them. So,
right.
maybe you could move one of them, but at the level at which he's performed, it's going to be tough to move. You're probably taking a significant loss on that, and so do you just bite the bullet and keep at it with him, or find other options? But
Mhm.
yeah, I think you're. Yeah, I mean, again, we're only 3 matches into the season, so there's
Right.
still a long ways to go. You're not going to make any decisions right now based on, you know, um, 270 minutes of play.
For sure.
But if 10, 12, match days go by and it still looks like this, those conversations in the back room with the big guys in the suits might become a little bit more severe.
Yeah. So a theory that I've kind of had at Middlesbrough, we have a player named Morgan Whitaker, who he went through a barren period for a good. We bought him last winter, and he didn't score a goal until like halfway through the season for the club, and it almost reminds me of Latte with y'all right now. Do you think at all that this might be that Latte is just a confidence player, that he needs to be felt needed, and he's just not getting that need sense from the club? Or am I kind of just maybe missing the mark on that?
Well, I don't think you're totally off, but I don't think confidence is the right word. But I do think he's a guy that once he scores one, he could score a boatload. But I don't think I don't think it's because he's lacking confidence per se. I just think he needs to get into a groove and get going. But again, there's this massive disconnect with the
Mhm.
entire rest of the attack. They've got to figure that out. He's not impressive in aerials.
Yeah.
Again, he's just not beating anyone to the ball right now when it's a long ball over the top and it's a foot race. So I don't know exactly. He's in great shape
Yeah.
physically. So I don't know there, but you mentioned him pressing and being dynamic on that aspect. I do think the lack of scoring and the lack of being involved in the attack has started to affect him defensively, and so
Mm.
he does need to get out of his head a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of was an issue with him at Burrow at times as well. I know y'all are a bit on the lower end of GM or salary cap in terms of the room in that area, but do you think y'all make any moves now, or do you wait to bring in anyone, and maybe do you start Pico Picalt instead of Miguel Almiron? Should this continue to go south with Miggy?
Yeah, I just don't think they're at a place right now where they're gonna pivot off of Biggie or off of Latte Loth. Again, we're talking about 3 match days, but
Mhm.
I do wonder if those conversations do get had further into the season. Um, I think that you're probably only making fringe moves right now in terms of any additions. And so you're probably gonna have to wait till after the World Cup when there's another window open if you could make anything significant. But even then, I don't know what you could bring in that's significant enough unless you're moving Miggy, unless you're moving Latte Loth. I don't think you can bring someone at that level alongside them, and so it gets very difficult because of some of the roster limitations in MLS.
And that's totally fair. Um, I want to transition to World Cup 2026. Of course, there's a lot of buzz happening around the country as, of course, games are being played across the U.S. Um, what is the buzz around Atlanta right now? Because y'all are hosting 8 games and a semifinal, and of course y'all are hosting. It was recently announced that y'all are hosting Uzbekistan, which is one of the cooler stories of World Cup qualifying. So, what is the buzz like around Atlanta right now in terms of World Cup action coming in less than 100 days?
Yeah, you can definitely feel it building, but it also does feel like there's still a little bit of the planning stage going on. And I don't mean the city is planning. I mean, you're really starting to say neighborhood bars that are trying to position themselves as this is where you want to come watch the World Cup. There are
Mhm.
watch parties that are being planned. There are, that sort of thing. How can each team, that each country, each fan base that comes here, kind of feel like they're at home, and so it's definitely getting exciting. There's no question about that. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, and I think you're also connecting it a little bit with what we saw with the Olympics. I think you can connect it a little bit with what we're seeing right now with the World Baseball Classic, and
Mhm.
like the passion of representing your country is nuts. And I think you see it in Tokyo when Japan's playing, Chinese Taipei. I think you see it in Miami when the Dominican will play Venezuela tomorrow.
Right.
You're seeing it in Houston, obviously, where the U.S. played Mexico, and I think it's been an interesting year for international competition, and I think obviously with respect to the Winter Olympics, I think the World Cup is the biggest of them all, and so I
Absolutely.
think you're just totally building towards this huge event. And Atlanta's ready to showcase itself. Like I think Atlanta does such a good job when hosting big events, whether it's the Final Four, whether it's college football championship, Super Bowls they've got coming up again. I think Atlanta's one of the elite cities at hosting big events,
Mhm.
and I think they're going to fare as well as any city in the country is going to.
What have you heard about what drew Uzbekistan specifically to Marietta and calling Marietta home for the World Cup?
Yeah, well, I think every every country has, I don't want to call it a list of demands, but preferences for what they're looking for in their home base. And whether that is, hey, everything needs to be run through us. It's our chefs, it's our cleaners, it's our field managers, blah blah blah. And, potentially, some places are willing to give different countries that, and willing not to. And so we've seen a lot of countries kind of lean more towards we're setting up our base camp at a college nearby. And the
Mm-hmm.
good news is there's so many colleges within 2 or 3 hours of Atlanta, that there's plenty to go around. But Uzbekistan gonna line up and kind of home base there for where the Atlanta United training facility is. It's a beautiful facility. It's massive, a ton of soccer fields, a ton of space, a ton of room. And it should be an outstanding stay for them.
So we recently had Nate Bukaty on the show, and he was talking about what makes Kansas City an incredible place to have the World Cup. Of course, they are hosting four different nations there as well. What is it that makes Atlanta special, though, Abe, to host the World Cup and host World Cup matches and the semifinal in particular? What is it that makes Atlanta a special city for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of things, but the first thing is the stadium. Mercedes-Benz Stadium and I understand it doesn't have the history of an Old Trafford or or Bernabeu or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
European stadium. But these teams come over from Europe that play here in Atlanta and say this is the greatest soccer stadium they've ever stepped foot in.
Wow.
And that's not just me talking. There's quote after quote after quote, from respected footballers saying that. And so I do think that this is the best soccer stadium in the country. I think routinely this is the largest crowd in MLS on a yearly average, week in, week out basis. And I think it starts there. I think the amount of hotels, I think the amount of public transport and ease of public transport that the city has also makes it a perfect spot for multiple countries to come in here and kind of just stay the whole time. And when there's games at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, you go to the game, and when there's not, you find a pub, you find a bar, a watering hole, and go sit there for 12 hours and watch 3 or 4 different games. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, I just think it. In the other thing is that Atlanta is such a melting pot of the world. I just think you have people already based here that probably represent every country, in the World Cup, with the exception of maybe one or two of the smaller ones making their debuts this time around. It's just there's so much representation of a massive variety throughout the population of Atlanta.
Oh, that's really cool. I love hearing that. Um, for sure. What are you most looking forward to about this World Cup?
Well, look, we got 2 games of Spain here in Atlanta,
Mm,
and they're going to enter as among the title favorites, and so I think it's going to be really cool, to because I think you're just going to have a lot of Spanish fans that just hang out here for the entire time, and they'll go to the games when Spain's playing, but they'll be out and about in the city watching all the other games when it's not Spain, and so. Certainly that. I'm also fascinated by the new format for the World Cup and how it's
mhm,
going to feel, how it's going to look, how it impacts, groups of death and that sort of thing, how it impacts the first knockout round. And so,
absolutely.
that's something we don't really know. We just have to kind of experience it. We're all going to experience it together.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so what do you think are some reasonable expectations for the U.S. men's national team coming into this World Cup? We of course made the knockouts last World Cup, but it kind of felt disappointing. Do you think we can expect to grow under Mauricio Pochettino?
Well, I mean, look, it's such a forgiving format, and you've got a pretty good group here for the U.S. the knockouts are from their perspective not an afterthought, but from the fan expectation, it should you shouldn't even be mentioning like that as a goal. Like that has to happen. I think your goal is to get to the round of 16 and look good in that matchup. And if you can make the quarterfinals, great. If you bow out at the round of 16, that's how it goes. But I think that is the baseline. That's the standard we should have for this team is to get to the round of 16.
Do you what are your impressions of Pochettino, and do you have any players to keep an eye on as we look to eventually see our World Cup squad get set?
No, I don't. I think the players to keep an eye on are all the same. I think the question is like who's going to be healthy. Pulisic always seems to be kind of banged up and knocked up, and we'll see if he's
Right.
healthy. Serginho Dest is always kind of banged up, knocked up. We'll see if he's healthy. Same for Weston McKennie. The guys this team is best when they're on the pitch. Um, they also are a little bit open to being picking up some knocks, and so need to certainly avoid that. I think the question is who's going to be the striker,
Mm,
and I think there's a number of different names that are going to be floated about, and it's come and gone. Guys, strikers in the last 4 or 5 years have been very very short lived. Going through like 6 or 8 game stretches, and you try someone out, and he looks good for 6 or 8 game stretches, whatever it is. So
mhm,
going to be really, really interesting to see who gets the starts up top and who's dangerous. But you know, from that perspective, I think that we keep wanting every generation to be this golden generation.
mhm,
I just don't think that's real. Not right now,
mm,
at least. There's just not enough talent across the board. I think we have, with respect to everyone on the team, I think we have one world class player, and that's Christian Pulisic. I
yeah,
think you go back through World Cup after World Cup. I think the most you've really had is probably two world class players, and one of those at times have been your goalie. And
yeah,
so I just don't think your roster's chock full of world class players the way a Germany is, or the way a Spain is, or France, or any of these other countries that are going to be favored. Brazil. Um, you just don't have that many world class players. Like I know we want to believe that they are,
right,
but they're not. They're
right.
just not. And I think we have to be open and understanding of that. And I'm hopeful in my lifetime that at some point we can set a team where you're like, yeah, there's like 7 world class players, 8 world class players. It's just not the case right now.
So you mentioned a couple of interesting things I want to get into here. The first one is the world class player situation, and you know, do you do you think that this is a cause of like our academies are still, not in are not flourishing enough? Because we do have a lot of young talent coming through, like MLS right now with Xavier Gozo and Owen Wolf, to name a couple. And of course, New York Red Bulls are pushing them out, young talent as well this season as well. Do you think that it's just our academies aren't doing too well, or is it just a combination of factors?
Look, I think you're making it more complicated than it really needs to be.
Mm,
Um, our country's best athletes don't grow up playing soccer.
yeah.
It's really that simple. Our best athletes are playing basketball and football. Even baseball has taken a pretty big hit in the last 30 years,
Hmm.
and so again, we can make this like, hypothetical. What if LeBron played soccer? What if Allen Iverson grew up playing soccer?
Hmm.
What if this guy or that guy played soccer? They don't play
Yeah.
soccer. It's just not there's not the incentive to grow up playing soccer as compared to the other sport. You look at the best countries in the world in soccer. What do their best athletes do? They grow up playing soccer. It's just I just don't think it's that
Mm,
complicated. I
yeah.
think that's just the moral of the story, really.
I can totally see that. Oh, I do want to get into the striker situation though, because that one is fascinating to me as well. Haji Wright, of course, is on a tear right now for Coventry City. He has scored in consecutive games right now as they're pushing for the championship title right now. Of course, Josh Sargent just made a move to Toronto. I don't know what is the deal with him not playing yet, and when he'll play exactly. Of course, he wasn't playing for a long time for Norwich, but who do you think maybe could be the top candidates for the striker role for US?
I'm interested in Ajiman.
Mm,
I think he's outstanding. I really do, and I watched him pretty closely when he was at Charlotte, and obviously haven't watched him as much as he went overseas, but I see a highlight here or there. I just think he's really good. I think he's
yeah.
dangerous in the air. I think he's dangerous with his feet. I think he's good at holding up play when asked to do that. I just think he does a lot of the things you want. I think he's missing a top flight speed. I think if you added that to his game, I think you would be talking about world class. But I think he's really, really good, really technically sound, and outstanding for a team. Works hard as well. So he's a guy I'm interested in. But again, there's so many guys that have come and gone quickly. Pepe was there for a moment. He was outstanding, and then he's kind of fallen off. I'm blanking on this other guy's name, Brian. I want to say Ramirez. I don't know if that's right. But he was up there for a while, and he went to Mexico, and he's kind of disappeared a
Vasquez,
little
right?
bit. Yeah, Brandon Vasquez. That's right. Yeah. And so yeah, I'm still very interested in Ajiman.
Yeah.
If we're up to me, but yeah,
Yeah, he's an incredible physical specimen. Been incredibly great for Derby County in the place of Carlton Morris, who was injured for a long time as well.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I like that one a lot too. Um, a couple more U.S. men's questions before we get on. Do you think Miles Robinson maybe gets a chance, or Brendan Aronson perhaps? I'd love to see Aiden Morris, but I know he's probably not going to get as good a look. But do you think Miles Robinson actually has a chance to crack the squad?
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a time a number of years ago, certainly when he was with Atlanta United, it felt like Miles Robinson was like the future of the center backs there for um the US men's national team. And I don't know if he's plateaued or what, but part of it is that Ream and Zimmerman, even as they aged, he couldn't quite beat those guys out. And so um it just felt like he was trending in that direction for a while, and then now it's kind of fallen off. I still think you like what he gives you physically. I think he's quick as can be. I think he's big, and can defend against some of the taller strikers in the world. But I don't know if he's a first choice guy. I do think he'll
Mm,
be on the roster if he's healthy. I don't know if he's a first choice guy or if he's there for depth.
fair enough. Let's switch to MLS. In general, what teams are you keeping an eye on this season as we head into a brand new season? Of course, we're like we've said before, 3 games in. But are there any teams that just like are eye catching right now? That's like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that, or, whoa, that's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, Real Salt Lake, who we just saw, has been very impressive, especially dealing with
Hmm.
some injuries and some red cards and some early problems there, and they've done very well to hold it together early on. Look, at the end of the day, it just still feels like LAFC and Inter Miami are the classes of each conference, and they're probably headed for another meetup in the MLS Cup until proven otherwise. If those two teams stay healthy, I just don't think there's a team in either conference better than them.
That's yeah, that was gonna be my next question. If there is anyone to take anyone of those two teams down, I mean, do you think there could be like do you think FC Cincinnati or Nashville? Nashville has kind of made a statement so far, but do you think they can keep that up and maybe they keep pushing on after an incredible season last year for them, historically speaking?
Yeah, I've just seen too many seasons where Nashville goes on a run and it just they peak too early.
Mm.
And you're like, man, they're unbeaten in 8 straight games, and then they're 2-2 down the stretch, and then they kind of flutter off. I mean, look, anything can happen in a playoff situation. There's no
Mhm.
question about that. But no, to answer your question, like just bluntly, like no, I don't think there's a team that if Miami is giving it their best that day, can beat them.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that even with Vancouver, and that was when they had their full strength, and with Ahmed there as well. Um, there have been some good players who have gone from MLS to the EFL Championship and other European leagues and have succeeded. I'm thinking right off the top of my head, like Aiden Morris, Adelson Malanda, Patrick Ajimag, who we talked about earlier, and Ahmed, who I just mentioned, who went to Norwich. Meanwhile, but it feels the opposite when people come from the Europe to MLS. And when I was talking to Nate Bukaty, he was saying that he feels like it's because the MLS is actually better than some of those leagues. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's different. And I think that the MLS is more of a team game, whereas a number of other leagues are about the individual talent, individual skill.
Mm,
And I think sometimes that can hamper guys who and potentially we're talking about Latte Loth here, who need the ball at their feet and need to be given space, and want to take things on their own, as opposed to a slow build up, trying to pass it around and find some cracks, and do it as a unit as opposed to do it individually. And so
mhm,
I just think sometimes, one skill set will translate better to a different formatted league, a different, way of playing than others. And I think that's been a very big challenge for players coming into MLS, is the league wide adjustments, as opposed to just getting to know a couple of new players, but also, it's just not played in the same manner.
yeah, that's fair. Like Morris and Melanda, for example, are playing in a very high tempo, high press team that is pretty rare and actually is kind of been talked about as kind of refreshing actually for England. So that makes a lot of sense. Um, what are your thoughts on the Premier League so far this year? Tottenham is one of the big stories, of course. They have a legit chance to go down this year. Do you think they actually do it?
No, I think they'll find a way down the stretch, to stay up. Look, for me, I'm an Arsenal fan, so even with the rivalry, I don't want them out of the Premiership. I'm unfortunately sitting here and look, being an Atlanta sports fan, we know where our mindset is at all times.
Hmm.
I just feel like I've seen this from Arsenal, and is this year different? Are they going to find a way to avoid some weird collapse on the road that costs them 3 points, that tightens up the race more than it should?
Hmm.
I've seen Arsenal come out the gates and hold it through and past midseason way too often, only to falter late to watch Man City or Chelsea or Liverpool take the crown. They've done an outstanding job. Arsenal has of staying in Champions League year by year by year by year.
Hmm.
But it does feel like this year maybe finally is the year, after a while, that they can hold on to first place and win the Premiership.
Okay, so you are an Arsenal fan. So, of course, I'm sure you have heard countless memes, countless talking about Arsenal's tactics and time wasting and corner FC and set piece FC, all of that. Any thoughts on that? And do you want to defend Arsenal and get on your soapbox for a bit?
Well, first off, I think you'll do anything within the rules to win games. And if the officials don't have the means in which to officiate that or, condemn that, then sure. Look, I mean, shoot, I played over 40 men's rec soccer on Monday nights, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'll find ways to waste time there if we've got a one goal lead.
For sure.
So yeah, I don't think this is anything new. I'm sure it is frustrating for opponents, but, I've also been there and watched as Arsenal trails and watched as the team takes 8 minutes off the clock. So,
Yep.
a little bit of payback. It's fine with me.
Yeah, for sure. I was thinking specifically about Brighton's manager calling you all out for that in the last game. That I
Well,
thought was
and here's
quite
the thing.
hilarious.
Like, I know he was, because I've seen, we've had managers here in Atlanta previously, not Tata, that have said this same crap about, like, only one team was interested in playing soccer today. And I just think that's nonsense. Like, once you have the lead in a game, everything changes. And
Absolutely.
so you get to dictate how you want to play because you're in a position that you need to be in. And so, yeah, I just think that anytime I see a manager anywhere say only one team was interested in playing soccer today, you can just miss me with that. It just means you
Mhm.
lost, or we're displeased with a draw. And so I don't have time for that.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that. It's been one of my more confusing narratives for the Premier League this season. Um, what are your thoughts on Carrick and Man United? Because ever since Carrick came in, they have been on fire until this last week when they lost to Newcastle. Of course, I have mixed feelings on Michael Carrick, but what are your thoughts from the outside looking in?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I'm still surprised at how down the table, right? Like you're just
Hmm.
so used to seeing certain teams, and Tottenham being one of them. You're used to seeing the same 4 or 5 teams up in the top 6, top 7, top 8, and anytime one of those teams takes a slide, and a significant slide, it kind of catches you off guard. And so, they're certainly in that group. I grew up with, Sir Alex Ferguson, and they were top 3 every year for, if 30 years, or whatever it was. And so, yeah, it's still almost like a little bit jarring sometimes
Hmm.
to see them down the table, although I know they're starting to make their way back up now. I certainly feels like it's too little too late to significantly get towards the top of the table.
Well, yeah, I mean they're third right now. I mean, you could argue that there's no way they're going to catch Arsenal, in my opinion. But
Yeah.
this may be actually the step that they needed, though. It might be too late considering they have Chelsea, Liverpool breathing down their necks, in particular for third and fourth, and of course Aston Villa as well. Um, do you think there's anyone in particular that could maybe make a shock charge at Europe? I know we have Brentford right now in seventh, eighth position. Do you think and of course they were tabled for relegation. Do you think anyone like them could actually sneak in?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're deep enough in the season that I just don't think you're going to get any more surprises. I think
Mm,
for the most part, what we see teams have been to this point in the season is what teams are. And so I think you're pretty much solidified with like who's going to be in Champions League, who's going to be in the Europa League, and right on down. I don't think you're going to see a ton of maneuvering, except for the teams that are within 1 or 2 points of each other. A draw here and a win there, and you flip. I don't think you're going to see any
mm.
big charges at this point, though.
Oh, fair enough. Um, so of course Champions League round of 16 started today. Um, and do you have any thoughts? We had a couple of huge blowouts today in the round of 16. Newcastle drew Barca in their first leg. Any thoughts on how the Champions League has gone so far?
No, I really haven't had an opportunity to watch it a ton.
Uh,
Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know if it was like the Olympics or what, but I didn't really dive in at the start, and so I see what Arsenal's doing, but that's kind of it.
that's fair. Yeah, I'm not a huge Olympics person, so the Champions League has kind of caught my imagination, especially Boda Glimt. But that's totally fair. Abe, thank you so much for coming on the show, my man. We greatly appreciate it. Tell everyone where they can find you and anything you want to shout out.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can find me, as you mentioned at the start, the pregame and the postgame for Atlanta United on the radio call on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game here in Atlanta. I'll share some thoughts every once in a while on social media, on Twitter/X. It's just my name at Abe Gordon, Gordon. And yeah, hit me up if you got any questions about what's going on soccer in Atlanta. Then I'm your guy.
Absolutely, guys. It's a great follow, and love listening to their content. Abe, again, thank you so much for coming on the show, my man. We greatly appreciate you.
Yeah, you got it, brother. Appreciate you having me.
Yep, anytime, man.
Well, folks, that's it for this episode of The Pitch Grid. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Listening on Spotify or Apple, a rating or follow goes a very long way. And lets others know that you enjoy the show. We'll be back soon with more chaos, from the world of soccer and the NFL. Until next time, stay sharp, y'all.